Amazon made roughly $31 billion in profit in a single year, and less than 4% of that came from selling you things online. The store, the boxes, the deliveries, the Prime memberships, that entire operation runs at a margin so thin it barely qualifies as a business. The real money machine is invisible to most customers. It lives inside the computers of hospitals, banks, governments, and the world's most powerful tech companies. Amazon is not a retailer that built a cloud. It is a cloud company that uses retail to distract the world from how it actually makes its money. And that is exactly what we are breaking down today. For most of the 20th century, the companies that made the most money were the companies that made things or sold them at scale. Ford, Walmart, General Electric. The equation was simple. The more physical goods you moved, the more money you accumulated. That model did not disappear, but it became increasingly difficult to defend. Margins compressed, competition intensified, and the companies chasing volume found themselves in a permanent race to the bottom, cutting prices and squeezing suppliers just to survive another quarter. Something far more powerful emerged in the background, a different kind of scale. Not the scale of selling more units, but the scale of owning the infrastructure that every business depends on. The scale of becoming so embedded in how the world operates that switching away from you is not just inconvenient, it is practically impossible. In 2026, the companies generating the highest returns are not the ones selling the most products. They are the ones renting the most infrastructure, digital infrastructure specifically, computing power, data storage, machine learning pipelines, security systems, the tools that every modern business must have just to open its doors in the morning. This is the shift, from selling goods to selling capability, from moving units to controlling the ground that everyone else builds on. And no company understood this transition earlier, or executed it more aggressively than Amazon. To understand why, you have to go back to a problem Amazon had internally. A problem so frustrating that it accidentally created one of the most valuable businesses in the history of capitalism. In the early 2000s, Amazon was growing fast, but internally, the company was a mess. Every team was building its own version of everything. One team needed storage, so they built storage. Another team needed compute power, so they built compute. The entire engineering organization was duplicating work, slowing down, and burning resources on problems that should have been solved once and shared. Jeff Bezos issued what became one of the most consequential memos in corporate history, a mandate requiring every team to expose its capabilities through standardized interfaces. Every service had to be built as if it were going to be offered to external developers one day. Anyone who did not comply, Bezos reportedly added, would be fired. What started as internal housekeeping became the blueprint for Amazon Web Services. Because once Amazon had organized its own infrastructure into clean, modular, rentable building blocks, the next logical question was, why keep this only for us? AWS launched publicly in 2006. At the time, most major companies were spending enormous amounts of money building and maintaining their own data centers, physical servers, IT staff, power consumption, security. It was expensive, slow, and inflexible. Scaling up meant months of procurement and installation. Scaling down meant wasted hardware, collecting dust in expensive rooms. Amazon offered something different. Pay for what you use. No upfront commitment. Turn it on when you need it, turn it off when you do not. And because Amazon had already built this infrastructure for its own use at enormous scale, it could offer it at a price no competitor could initially match. Here is where the story gets counterintuitive. Amazon's retail division, the one most people associate with the company's success, has historically operated at near zero profit margins. The products, the warehouses, the logistics network, the free shipping, all of it costs nearly as much as it earns. For years, critics called this reckless. What they were actually watching was a deliberate subsidy. The retail operation was not meant to make money on its own. It was meant to generate the scale and the cash flow that funded Amazon's real asset, AWS, and the retail losses were, in effect, the price of building the most dominant cloud business on Earth without anyone noticing until it was too late. By 2023, AWS represented roughly 17% of Amazon's total revenue, but it generated close to 70% of the company's total operating income. Think about what that means. Most of what you see when you think of Amazon, the website, the shopping, the delivery trucks, is, from a profitability standpoint, almost beside the point. The money is somewhere most customers never see. When most people look at Amazon, they see a retailer. They see convenience, they see free shipping and one-click purchases. That perception is not an accident. It is carefully maintained. And it is exactly why most people, including most business owners and investors, underestimate what Amazon actually is. The people who built generational wealth from Amazon's rise were not the ones who shopped there. They were the ones who understood the infrastructure play before it was obvious. Investors who looked beyond the headline business and asked, what does this company actually sell to other businesses? Entrepreneurs who asked, what is the new layer of the economy forming right now, and how do I position myself on top of it? This pattern repeats throughout business history. The people who made the most money during the California gold rush were not the miners. They were the ones selling pickaxes, shovels, and denim pants. The miners chased the gold. The suppliers charged everyone chasing it. AWS is the 21st century version of selling the pickaxe. Every startup that needs a server, AWS. Every enterprise migrating its legacy systems, AWS. Every government agency modernizing its IT infrastructure, frequently AWS. The gold rushes of our era are AI, fintech, e-commerce, streaming, and digital healthcare. And the infrastructure they all depend on is, to a remarkable degree, running on Amazon servers. The behavioral economics concept at work here is what researchers call the platform trap. Once a business builds its operations on a particular cloud provider, migration to a competitor is not simply expensive in financial terms, it is operationally dangerous. The risk of downtime, data loss, integration failure, and employee retraining creates a switching cost so high that most companies choose to stay and pay, year after year, regardless of price increases. Amazon understood this before the market did. The average earner sees a transaction, a purchase, a subscription, a service fee. The winner sees a trap, not in a cynical sense, but in a structural sense. A system so deeply woven into how a customer operates that loyalty becomes almost involuntary. That is the difference between building a business and building an ecosystem. The question is not whether you admire this. The question is whether you understand it well enough to recognize where the next version of it is forming, and whether you are positioned to benefit from it rather than simply be consumed by it. In 2012, Netflix was at a crossroads. The company had just survived one of the most embarrassing public missteps in its short history, a botched attempt to split its streaming and DVD businesses that cost it nearly 1 million subscribers in a single quarter. The brand was damaged, the stock had collapsed, and the company was sitting on a technology infrastructure decision that would either save it or accelerate its decline. Netflix made a choice that at the time was deeply controversial inside the company. Rather than continue building and managing its own data centers, which had already failed during peak traffic moments, causing outages that drove customers to competitors, it would migrate its entire operation to Amazon Web Services. This was not a small decision. Netflix is one of the most data-intensive operations in the world. Streaming video requires enormous compute capacity, low latency delivery, massive storage, and the ability to scale instantly when tens of millions of people decide to watch something at the same moment. Handing that infrastructure over to Amazon meant trusting a competitor because Amazon had its own video streaming ambitions, with the technical backbone of the entire company. The migration took years. It was disruptive. It forced Netflix to rebuild how its engineering teams thought about software, from systems designed for physical servers to systems designed for the cloud. Entire departments had to be retrained. Internal resistance was significant. What most coverage of this story misses is the competitive paradox it created. Amazon Prime Video, AWS's most valuable customer in the streaming space, competes directly with Netflix for subscribers. Amazon is simultaneously Netflix's landlord and its rival. Netflix pays Amazon hundreds of millions of dollars annually to run its infrastructure, money that Amazon can use to fund the very competitor trying to take Netflix's customers. Netflix executives knew this. They accepted it anyway, because the alternative, rebuilding their own global infrastructure from scratch, would have cost more, taken longer, and delivered less. The trap was real, and Netflix walked into it with full awareness. What happened next is the case study that every infrastructure investor should know. After completing its AWS migration, Netflix's engineering velocity accelerated dramatically. The company could launch in new markets in weeks, not years. It could experiment with algorithms, compression technology, and content recommendations at a speed that would have been impossible with its own hardware. And when it released its first major original series, House of Cards, and demand spiked beyond any historical precedent, the platform handled it without a single reported outage. Netflix grew from roughly 25 million subscribers at the start of its AWS migration to over 230 million subscribers by the early 2020s. The infrastructure decision it was forced into by earlier failures became, in hindsight, one of the most important competitive advantages it ever built. That is what AWS does. It does not just provide computing power. It provides the operating leverage that allows a company to grow faster than its own ability to build. And every company that uses it pays Amazon consistently, automatically, and at increasing rates as they grow. You do not need to build a cloud company to apply the lesson at work here, but you do need to understand the principle, because it operates at every level of economic life, from billion-dollar corporations down to individual careers and side businesses. The principle is this: the most durable income is income that comes from being embedded, not just chosen. A customer who hires you because you are convenient can replace you the moment someone cheaper appears. A client who has integrated your work into their core processes, their systems, their institutional knowledge. That client faces real costs to leave. The income that comes from that relationship is structurally different. It is recurring, it compounds, and it grows with the client rather than competing against an ever-expanding pool of alternatives. Think about what this means practically. A freelance designer who delivers individual projects competes on price and availability every single time. A designer who embeds themselves into a company's brand system, maintains their design library, trains their team, and owns the institutional knowledge of how the brand communicates, that person has built switching costs. Replacing them is not just finding someone cheaper, it is rebuilding years of context. That is leverage. The same principle applies to a consultant who helps a business implement a new system, then becomes the person who manages that system. To a creator who builds a content format so distinctive that their audience associates the format with them personally. To a developer who builds the integration that connects a company's 4 key software tools and becomes the only person who fully understands how those tools talk to each other. The mindset shift this requires is moving from thinking about what you deliver to thinking about what you enable, and how deeply that enablement is woven into how someone operates. Infrastructure thinking is not reserved for technology companies. It is a strategic posture available to anyone who chooses to stop competing on price and start competing on irreplaceability. This week, the question worth sitting with is this. In your career, your business, or your side income, are you a transaction or are you infrastructure? There is a concept in advanced business strategy called distribution leverage. The idea that controlling how others access a market is worth more than competing within that market. It is the reason Visa and MasterCard make more money than most of the banks whose cards they process. It is the reason the companies that own the payment rails, the shipping networks, the advertising platforms, and yes, the cloud infrastructure, consistently outperform the businesses that use those rails to operate. AWS is the purest modern example of distribution leverage at scale. Amazon does not need to win in retail, media, healthcare, finance, or logistics in order to profit from those industries growing. As long as those industries grow and continue to need computing infrastructure, Amazon wins. It has positioned itself below the competition rather than within it. And being below everyone means you cannot be disrupted by any single player changing the game above you. This is the model that the most sophisticated wealth builders in this era have quietly internalized. The question is never just, how do I compete in this market? The deeper question is, can I own a layer that everyone competing in this market depends on? It is why Shopify is worth more than most retailers. Shopify does not need any single merchant to succeed. It needs the category of online commerce to grow because it owns the infrastructure that merchants build on. It is why Stripe, valued in the hundreds of billions, has never needed to be a bank. It just needs businesses to process digital payments, because it processes them. It is why Substack, Ghost, and similar platforms are fighting to own the infrastructure layer beneath the creator economy, not the content itself. The pattern is identical in each case. Identify a growing category. Build the infrastructure layer beneath it. Charge a small fee to everyone competing in that category. Scale horizontally, not by doing more, but by having more people depend on what you have already built. Here is the uncomfortable version of this insight. Most people spend their careers trying to win at the game being played on the surface. Better skills, lower prices, more hours, smarter marketing, all of that is real and none of it is wrong. But the people extracting the most value from modern economic growth are frequently not playing at the surface at all. They are operating one level down, owning the infrastructure, the platform, the distribution channel that everyone visible is fighting over. The game on the surface is competitive by design. The game underneath it, by comparison, is nearly frictionless once you have established position. The question this raises, and it is worth sitting with, is whether what you are building right now is a position on the surface or a position underneath it. AWS did not make Amazon the most valuable retailer in the world. It made Amazon something more durable than that. It made Amazon a tax on the digital economy. Invisible, automatic, and almost impossible to avoid. In the 21st century, that is what the most powerful wealth building systems look like. Not a product, not even a brand, a layer. Amazon did not build the most valuable company in the world by selling more things. It built it by becoming the ground that other companies stand on, by making itself so structurally necessary to how the modern economy operates that removing it would cause large parts of the internet to simply stop working. That is not a technology story. It is a business architecture story. And the lesson it carries is not limited to cloud computing or to billion-dollar corporations. The principle, own the layer beneath the competition, not just a position within it, is one of the most replicable, wealth-building frameworks in modern economic history. The shift from transactional income to infrastructure income, From being chosen to being embedded, from competing on quality to competing on irreplaceability. These are the moves that separate the businesses that scale from the businesses that plateau, regardless of the industry, regardless of the size. What we covered today is the foundation, but the mechanism behind how companies like Amazon, Shopify, and Stripe hold their position, how they prevent disruption even when better competitors appear, goes much deeper than infrastructure alone. It involves something most business coverage never discusses, a strategic layer that makes the infrastructure stick. And that is what is coming next. Subscribe to Business and Money Secrets and come back tomorrow. What we're covering next will make today's episode look like the introduction.